Okay, so we got opening hands here, Nathan, and what are we looking at?
Well, from Corey's side, there's two Tron pieces in a map. Certainly the ideal start that you could hope for. One thing we didn't really talk about is the presence of the One Ring from the Tron side in this matchup. One
Hmm.
dynamic that can come up with that is if you can cast the One Ring, then you might be able to just stop a living end once it's resolved to get to a point where your Oblivion Stones can catch a board. So that's a pretty big part of this matchup where if you get to a mana threshold where you can start untapping with the One Ring or just playing a second copy, you can do some really messed up things.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it also means that like maybe you don't want to run the ring out too early. Or I mean, I guess Corey's still going to be interested in jamming it on turn 3 here because he has no other lines.
Well, Corey does have another line. He could choose to go for Chromatic Star, cast Sylvan Scrying, get the second tower, so he can cast Ulamog the next turn. That is a possibility.
You can actually do both, right? Because that's only 3 mana on top of the like ring mana, which is 4.
Great point. So Corey could just do it all. He could cast the One Ring, he can cast Sylvan Scrying and start cycle that. That's going to be pretty strong. And from Carmen's side right now, she's still missing some of the pieces like the Charlotte's Agent or the Violent Outburst to get going, but has a lot of looks here.
Yeah, you see, by the way, Carmen, the way she's sequencing her cycling is that she waited on cycling the Street Wraith until she hit another black card in hand. So in case you drew Grief, she would always have a thing to pitch it to.
Grief is definitely a good reason to hold on to the Street Wraith. And even here, though, without having the Violent Outburst, the Grief is only going to be temporary.
Ooh, how big is this Force Negation pickup from Carmen?
I think it's pretty huge to be able to counter the One Ring. The only issue is that this Ulamog is still going to come down on the next turn. So Carmen doesn't know it, but this Force of Negation is only a pretty temporary solution to the problems at hand.
Yeah, it does sound like Carmen really is in a spot where she needs to top deck a Cascade spell like right now in order to not be in all sorts of trouble.
This is a critical turn, like you said. If there is hopefully a Violent Outburst, then you can end of turn Violent Outburst, put, it looks like, 14 power into play, and maybe race this Ulamog. But even a Charlotte's Agent might not be good enough here, just because Carmen can get Ulamog on the next turn, and that might kill 2 threats, which makes the pressure a lot more easy to manage from Corey's side.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's really Violent Outburst that's going to be an important one here. And what do we see? Just another land from Carmen here.
But we got the mighty Bone Crusher Giant. We're not leaving here empty-handed.
He is mighty. Look at that huge foot on that man. Just gotta come down here and try and look strong in the face of this gigantic spaghetti monster that's gonna chomp down on Carmen's lands. Carmen actually decides to that it probably looks more scary if she doesn't play the Bone Crusher and just passes right back.
I think I like this. I mean, playing the Bone Crusher, while it is the only play you can make, definitely gives Corey a lot of information about the strength of your hand. This way, maybe there are certain times when Corey decides to play an Oblivion Stone or something more defensive that gives Carmen more draw steps.
Ulamog just chomps down on those steam vents here. Probably getting a bit gassy after that meal, but yeah, someone who is definitely not getting gassy is Carmen with this hand that is looking.
Ulamog is no slouch. Yeah.
Definitely no slouch. So yeah, and I think that these demons are just going to be, a little appetizer for Ulamog, who is like soon going to drop down on 20 cards from Carmen's deck. And yeah, that's so actually, does Carmen have time to like hit the living end before she dies to Ulamog?
Well, there's the living end.
That's not exactly what I meant. That's gonna make it kind of harder, right? Because you need she's gonna be at what 4 cards left, so she needs both the Cascade spell on top and the living end still left in the deck.
And that Karn from Corey will definitely seal the deal. That means that there's no way a living end is going to make a huge impact here. The graveyard's going to be shut off, and I was hoping to see a stomp on the previous turn, but understandably, Carmen decides, well, I'd rather not show him that one. It's a little too embarrassing right now.
It definitely was a bit of an unfortunate draw there for Carmen. So what happens in the post-board games here?
We do see that Corey gets to board on some of these hate pieces because you only really need access to a few copies in your sideboard, like maybe even one copy of a hate piece. The main thing that Carmen gets, like we talked about, are these Fulminator Mages and then access to some number of artifact destruction. Let's see if she even wants to board in like the Force of Vigors. Maybe she just decides it's not worth it.
it's kind of interesting, but since she knows that Corey's gonna bring in like 2 chalices, maybe even the Stone Brain, having access to Force of Vigor can actually be huge. I guess this is working Stone Brain. Yeah, you do have a window if it's played on turn 2. So.
How do you feel about Corey boarding out an Oblivion Stone in order to have it as a Karn target?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't actually realize that like if that was the reason for these sideboard decisions. I definitely think you gotta bottle the Dismembers for 2 chalices, but if you also want to bring in the Stone Brain, which I think you do, especially on the draw here, you gotta make room for it. And yeah, it makes like with the Ugins, it's probably like better to draw anyway. I'm not sure. Maybe you could cut the Khan Liberated into the like 4 Force negation. It's kind of embarrassing, and the Wormcoil Engine is actually impactful.
I'm pretty surprised that Corey's cutting a Wormcoil Engine here. I think that Wormcoil Engine is the sort of card that helps you win in games where you find the first hate piece, and you need something to use your mana on that helps you win. In my opinion, I might go for something like Ulamog, although it can be good in like the games we just saw. I think there are more games than not where it rots in your hand and doesn't have the impact you want. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that could actually make sense too. The like even though you suggested Ulamog, right?
Yeah, I don't really think that Ulamog is that important.
Yeah, makes sense. Like we did see it finish off the last game, but it is true. Like that doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna work well in the post-board games.
The other thing to note is that Carmen didn't bring in any copies of Subtlety. That was kind of a card that I was thinking could do a lot of work from the Living Inside, but it makes sense that with having more cards like the Fulminator Mages, your slots are a little limited, and sacrificing cards that help contribute to doing your main thing, your plan A, is a pretty big cost.
I just got confused a bit by Corey's first hand there, but the mismatched Tron lands is definitely, doing us in here. Now we see a hand that, doesn't have the full set of Tron, but does have a Warping Whale, which I think is going to be good enough to keep.
This hit is actually really strong from Carmen's side because the generous ends mean that you get to cast Fire Ace on turn 2 and tap a land. And then you also could pitch your Fulminator Mage to Grief if you're thinking you can go, oh, I'm going to Grief, then I'm going to cast Charlotte's Agent on turn 3 if I can find a third land. So I definitely like just sacrificing the Fulminator Mage here. What are your thoughts on doing it right now? I mean, it's actually a pretty heads-up decision maybe to Grief on turn 1.
Yeah, because this way you can snag an Expedition map. I also want to add that this Fulminator Mage is actually not castable in this hand because there's only 1 Stomping Ground for Carmen to get. So she's going to have to get Breeding Pool and Stomping Ground and won't actually be able to cast that Fulminator Mage. So I think it makes a lot of sense that you just like, throw it away here and just make sure that you can like maybe, steal a game by taking an Expedition map.
And on top of map, we also have 2 Chalices, which means
there's
a huge incentive to Grief right now because this hand is really not good against Chalice of the Void.
Yeah, it makes sense.
What sort of cards are you looking at to take here? So she elects to take Karn.
It's kind of interesting because this this ice is actually going to make it so that the warp, like you can like tap Corey out of Warping Whale. So the question is like, is it just going to be enough to have like a single Generous End and a Grief here?
I think that one main incentive to do this is the idea that if Corey draws another threat, the Warping Whale might rot in hand if you get to Charlotte's Agent on turn 3. That's a pretty big upside because otherwise you can take the Karn. If she draws a threat, take that threat, leave Warping Whale in hand versus the alternative of if you don't do that, then you have to take Warping Whale. You can take the Karn on the way back, but if they draw a threat, you might just lose with your 2 cards.
Yeah, exactly. I think this makes a lot of sense. It means that Corey doesn't really have a follow-up. Corey did draw a second power plant here. Again, the mismatched Tron lands are, confusing us a bit. But so he doesn't quite have Tron yet. And this ice is going to mean he doesn't have Warping Whale up. So now Carmen is really looking for a land drop here just to be able to go like Shadow's Agent into Grief and Generous End. It's not like the most generous Living End, but it is going to like take care of this One Ring and like, provide a 2-turn clock.
The main downside of going for this line that Carmen did is if she doesn't draw the land here, which she does, super huge, then we might end up in a situation where this Warping Whale shuts down her entire game plan. But luckily we found the land, we have the Charlotte's Agent, and we're sort of in business. Like you said, 2-turn clock. What are you thinking of taking here? I mean, we can probably dismiss taking the Warping Whale, but it's interesting between the Ugin and the One Ring. What do you take here?
Yeah, like the issue is that the Ugin does require, another Tron land drawn, whereas the One Ring can actually come down at a relevant point. if Corey just draws any land here. So but the issue is that the Ugin is like the more threatening one. Like the One Ring you can kind of beat. So I think you probably got to play around, the worst case scenario and just take away Ugin in case like Corey just find the last Tron piece here.
And super rewarded for that decision. But a natural Tron
Oh,
land.
and there's a mine. That's the last piece.
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge. Do you make a Scion token with your Warping Wheel here just to jump? Or you can actually play the ring. Oh, right.
The mine, right? So you can just leave it up. Now now we're at a point of the game, like we talked about, where you get to start looping One Rings. And the eventual goal here is you're going to try to get an Oblivion Stone so you can crack it and then leave up Warping Whale on the same turn.
Oh yeah, that's going to be the best spot you want to get in, because this Living End deck, like, it's not just like does its thing once. Like, it actually, in this matchup, even if you can Oblivion Stone the Living End player, they can just like go, here's my board back again. So you kind of need like that double protection of Sweeper plus interaction. Yeah, and the Warping Whale does a pretty good job of being that specific interaction.
I like the attack here
trying to get through the invisibility of the ring. It doesn't really work.
I was hoping to see something like a Bone Crusher Giant here, but I guess we'll have to settle for waiting a turn on drawing that.
Oh, right. Bone Crusher does let you it helps you win through the ring.
But there's the Oblivion Stone, like we talked about. And Corey made an interesting decision. He decided to actually use the Warping Whale to play an Eldrazi Scion. What do you think of that decision? And like, what sort of thought process do you think Corey has right now?
Yeah, I actually wonder why this decision was made. I wonder if it's like in case I draw Ulamog, now I have 10 mana. I think that's a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah.
And there might also be some Karn lines where like this one extra mana actually matters. And Corey values that more than the ability to, like, in case you draw Oblivion Stone, to protect yourself from a violent outburst.
The other thing is Corey has multiple chalices in his deck, so every turn that goes by without Carmen putting some sort of pressure on him is just going to give him a long-term advantage with the One Ring being active. And so this is kind of a critical spot where Carmen needs to find something really good here.
Yeah, what can she even find at this point?
I mean, the idea could be if Corey cracks his Oblivion Stone and you draw another Cascader, then you can Grief and take the One Ring and also bring back your 2 Generous Ends that you have in hand that you're going to cycle. So that's one way that I can imagine winning this game.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you think you can beat the Karn Liberated at that point?
I'm not sure. I think it's ambitious just because the amount of mana that Corey has and the amount of cards he can draw mean that there's going to be a lot that needs to go right for this to work out. But to me, that's like the main situation in which I can imagine Carmen making a comeback here.
We see, like last game, Ulamog was the only one to get a meal here, but now Carmen is taking a little snack there with that food token, fresh from the tree of Generous Ends. And yeah, there was no Cascade spell here, but this Courage of Mysteries could turn into one. Do you think there's a chance that Carmen could try and just like hard cast her things after this Oblivion Stone crack? I guess Corey can just even take the damage. So
I think it's a little bit too slow. I think you need to shoot your sights a little higher. And even in this spot, like Corey's just decided, I don't need to crack this Oblivion Stone. Like, what's the rush? And I like this decision. It makes a lot of sense to me. Like, use your Scion, chump block, and take your turn. You have plenty of looks at stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think he's even gonna crack it in the turn here? Okay, he is gonna spend his mana. Yeah.
Do you like this decision? Player on Charlotte's Agent, but get punished by Violent Outburst, essentially, at the cost of 5 damage.
I definitely think the 5 damage is worth it. But I do wonder if you're even supposed to crack it in a turn there, or just like take another turn and wait. Because with the ring in play, like you're just like, digging towards like a spot where you're just like, invincible. So I think you could have actually just like taken another hit there. Because there is a Warping Whale on the top, right?
Yeah, I would have liked to see Carmen cycle that Curator just to give her a few more looks at Violent Outburst, because now that Corey hit the Warping Whale, there's not a ton she can do.
Yeah, now this game is like, kind of closed out, right? You can play Karn here and leave up Warping Whale, and that's probably gonna do it. I guess the Karn is not super threatening because like Carmen has a lot of lands and not many other permanents here.
I would just
But
start Karn plussing, honestly.
Yeah, that's also what I think is going to happen. Karn plus.
I mean, maybe Corey's worried about force negation and just doesn't want to trade his turn off like that. But to me, every turn you trade off is really good for you, and that leaves one less force negation for the warping whale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's obviously still a way that Calvin could battle through this. Is like, you know, a multiple turn sequence of like, you know, cycling into a violent outburst and a force, and then like you have the generous end to provide you the 6 mana to like combine those two.
The other idea that Corey could have right now is, if I get another One Ring in play, I'm safe versus everything. So he's just trying to take the most conservative line possible here. That's not a bad draw. I mean, you
no, the Whip Call here is super nice. Like, also like allowing you to gain some life so you don't end up dying to your own ring. And yeah, you can play it and still leave up Warping Whale. So that does seem better than Karn to play out here.
Right.
Of course, now Carmen's hand is like in a really bad spot with the double living end, and I think she's actually going to be relieved to see the Karn come down, because that means that at least it means these suspense spells can you know find some purchase.
And how many copies of Living End is Carmen playing? Does she have the full 4, or is she only?
She has a full 4 main, but I don't know if she has them all in the post-board games.
Yeah, a series of unfortunate draws here, with drawing 2 Living Ends after playing the first one. Definitely hurt this game. And to be honest, like, the main thing that we had to think about was, is this turn 3 Living End going to be good enough? And that was sort of the critical decision. But again, we didn't really have other ways of spending our mana, so we were almost forced to play it on that turn.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's too many ways out for Carmen at this point. I guess like this, you're still just looking for a Cascade spell with this Waker of Waves. Of course, Carmen has no, you know, knowledge about this Warping Whale here. And also, you know, we're just going to like, you know, work from the assumption that Carmen actually has 1 Living End left in her deck. If she like has no more left, is there like any line? Oh, actually bins the Shardless Agent, which I think means that there are no more Living Ends available.
That is real unfortunate. I mean, we would have certainly seen a Shardless Agent there, but as we can see both sides, Corey having the Warping Whale is going to seal the deal, unfortunately. At this
point.
Exactly.
And now she even been through the Force Negation in order to grab a Misty Rainforest so she can hardcast this end. And I think this is this game is not gonna end so easily. So yeah, it's quite tough. Might we even see a Khan Ultimate? Target yourself, exile Ugin.
I think one interesting part of this matchup is that the Living End deck is the aggro deck, and the Tron deck is just a control deck. Like, yes, it has a ton of ways of generating mana, but if you get to this stage of the game, you're playing against a ton of counter spells with Warping Whale, sweepers with Oblivion Stone, time walks with the One Ring. It's really tough.
Yeah, I feel like we actually can do the astronaut meme with, like, you know, wait, Tron is a control deck, and always has been.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is just the role it like likes to take in most matchups.
Yeah, I sort of like playing Tron for that reason more than I expected, just because I felt like I could craft a game plan where, okay, I can play around all these edge case scenarios. I have the time, I have the mana and the resources, and just be very meticulous, which is like the sort of thing that I really like getting into when I'm in these late game spots. And it's like, what can go wrong that I can lose to?
Agreed. Tron is super sweet to play for that reason. I can actually, you know, I mean, I know Will is not going to be happy to hear about this, but yeah, it's kind of a treat, because like, you know, it is just like, you know, this like, you know, the regular control deck like scenarios and like with tutor like toolboxes and so on, but then also you just like get this like massive unfair head start on mana to like support that. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's not just like, you know, you hit your Tron, then like, you know, you play your big boom booms and then the opponent dies. That does happen sometimes. But in a lot of games, it's actually really important that, like, you know, you use your sweepers right, and you use your, you know, like, you find the right thing in your card, and you sequence your interaction in the right way. And yeah, that's exactly what we see from Corey here. Now completely locking out the game from Undercommon here. Left with there's the Fulminator Mage.
Fulminator Mage, a little late to the party.
It is going to take, you know, Corey off Tron, but I don't really think it's in a relevant way. And here we see the generous end here, just coming in there, bringing a little apple, and hoping that like this is going to be good enough to be a victory. But yeah, unfortunately, I think Carmen is going to lose this one here. I would really love to see the Khan Ultimate, though. I think we can make it happen.
Me too. But We'll see. Is Corey a man of the people, or is he just going to take his win, start clicking his planeswalkers, and resolve not to ultimate?
Because we agree, like, you get to ultimate Ugin before Carmen gets to Living End, right? So it does seem pretty juicy.
Yeah, I would love to see some more of that. But looking into, the next match, how are you feeling about battling versus Corey and his Tron deck? I know you sort of mopped the floor with him round one. I don't know if you thought this deck is really good against big mana combo, but that was my assumption. Like Storm does a really good job as a spell-based deck against Tron traditionally, yeah?
Yeah, I definitely felt like, pretty easy. I was a little bit worried that, like, the fact that I don't play the full 8 rituals in this version and it's more interactive, that was gonna, like, hurt me. I also, like, caught a remand for the 4th Gifted Given, which is, like, just a mistake. I realized, after making that change, I'm like, yeah, that's just greedy. So, but the fact that, like, Corey does not run Relic of Progenitus definitely gives me some relief. He does have the Warping Whales, which can be quite annoying, especially at killing Barals. Like, in my Magic game thing, like, that was the card I was most worried about and always had to, like, work around. But it feels more like a puzzle that you, like, can work around this stuff rather than something that's, like, an actual issue that I'm just going to hope he doesn't draw.
Yeah, and we saw you in the last match taking your time, just making sure you executed on that combo really well. Were you trying to run, like, what sort of scenarios can this be disrupted in? What can go wrong? Or just, like, how can I get to Grape Shot the quickest? What was your thought?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what I was trying to figure out. There was, like, this spot with, like, okay, so, like, there was a One Ring in play, which meant I couldn't kill that turn. But, like, what's the most disruptive I could set up? And I figured out that if I get, Blood Moon in play with an island up, I can, like, remand something even if the Blood Moon is dealt with. And that meant that, like, at the end where Corey ended up going for the Boseiju line, I actually had, like, I could safely go for Past in Flames, even though I would tap out for it, because the only way that Corey was able to cast Warping Whale was to kill my Blood Moon, giving me an island so I could remand the Warping Whale. And that was pretty cool. But yeah, I also, next time I will remember that, if you remand your own Desperate Ritual, it does not go back into your hand. Like, if you flashbacked it. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
That's true. Kind of ancient lore at this point after not seeing Storm for so long. But
definitely. Oh, we see an animated ring here, just trying to end this game. I mean, I know there's one way to end this game, Corey. It just requires you to, like, -14 that card. It's not that hard. You get started with a whole generous end.
We want a new game, right?
I definitely want to see a new game. Like, just give Carmen a chance. Like, she only got to play 2 games here. Did you defeated her in 3, right? So yeah, she got on the scoreboard.
Yes, we did have a pretty sweet match. I really enjoyed playing against her Living End deck and kind of showcasing why when the Living End deck gets start hard casting threats, it's actually really scary in the late game versus Scam because you have to play so many interactive cards.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually think, like, you've benefited from the way Carmen sideboarded with, like, bringing out some of the curators.